On the 12th of August in the year 1570, in the chambers of the Kremlin palace in Moscow, Tsar Ivan IV ordered that a rival prince be brought before the court. The nobleman's crime was alleged conspiracy against the Tsar, but the punishment Ivan had devised was neither swift execution nor imprisonment. Instead, the prince was publicly stripped before the entire court, including noble women. He was then castrated by executioners while Ivan watched and commented sarcastically. The nobleman was forced to parade naked through the streets of Moscow before finally being executed. This combination of humiliation, bodily violation, and public degradation was characteristic of Ivan, but he was far from unique in history. Throughout the centuries, multiple monarchs invented punishments that combined physical cruelty with humiliation of an intimate nature, using their victims' bodies and dignity as instruments of political terror. These punishments were not merely about causing pain or death, but about completely breaking the victim through violation and shame, creating an example so horrifying that no one would dare challenge royal authority. This is the story of the kings who invented punishments of an intimate nature for their enemies, practices that reveal the darkest aspects of absolute power when, combined with calculated cruelty and an obsession with total domination, Ivan ruled Russia from the year 1547 until his death in the year 1584. The second half of his reign after the death of his first wife Anastasia in the year 1560 was marked by growing paranoia and extreme cruelty. Ivan created the Oprichnina, a state within a state governed by his black personal guard, the Oprichniki. These men possessed absolute authority and committed atrocities in the Tsar's name. Heinrich von Stauden, a German mercenary who served as an Oprichnik, wrote detailed memoirs of Ivan's practices. According to von Stauden, Ivan not only ordered tortures but frequently participated personally. One of his favorite punishments for nobles suspected of disloyalty was public castration. The victim would be bound in a square or in the Kremlin itself, and executioners would remove his organs while the court watched. Ivan allegedly mocked the victims during the process, asking if they were now loyal or making obscene comments. In some cases, documented by Russian chroniclers, even forced the wives of executed nobles to be presented at court, where they were publicly stripped and humiliated before being sent to convents or distributed among the Oprichniki. During the sacking of Novgorod in January of the year 1570, chroniclers record that Ivan ordered the city's women to be publicly violated as collective punishment for Novgorod's alleged support of Ivan's enemies. The Tsar himself reportedly watched these atrocities from an elevated platform. Ivan's logic seemed to be that humiliation of an intimate nature was more effective than simple death for terrorizing the population. He wanted victims and their families to suffer not only physically but psychologically with public shame that destroyed all dignity and family honor. Al-Hakim bi-Amr. Allah was the sixth Fatimid caliph governing Egypt from the year 996 until the year 1021 AD. He's remembered as one of the most eccentric and cruel rulers in Islamic history. Al-Hakim issued bizarre decrees and elaborate punishments for those who violated them. One of his strangest edicts forbade women from leaving their homes entirely. To enforce this, he ordered cobblers to stop making women's shoes. Women caught outside their homes were publicly stripped and whipped in the streets of Cairo as a warning. Contemporary Arab chroniclers such as Al-Khalkhashandi documented that Al-Hakim also had an obsession with controlling his subjects' intimate behavior. He banned the manufacture and sale of certain foods he considered stimulants. Merchants caught selling these items were publicly castrated in the marketplace. Al-Hakim allegedly believed that by removing transgressors' reproductive capacity, he was purifying society. In another documented case, Al-Hakim ordered that a man accused of looking at a woman inappropriately be castrated, and then forced to wear women's clothing and work in the market as a woman for the rest of his life. This punishment combined mutilation with gender humiliation, forcing the victim to live in a state of constant shame. Al-Hakim also punished political adversaries in elaborate ways. When he discovered a conspiracy among some of his viziers, he did not execute them immediately. First, he forced them to be publicly stripped and paraded through Cairo, mounted backward on donkeys, a humiliating position. Then they were castrated, and only then executed. Al-Hakim disappeared mysteriously in the year 1021 during one of his nocturnal walks, probably assassinated, possibly by his own sister, weary of his tyranny. Louis XV, known as the Universal Spider for his political intrigues, ruled France from the year 1461 until the year 1483. Though he was an astute politician who consolidated royal power, Louis was also cruel toward his enemies. Philippe de Comines, a chronicler who served Louis, documented several of his inventive punishments. Louis had iron cages built that were so small prisoners could neither stand upright nor lie down completely. Nobles who betrayed him were placed in these cages for months or years. But beyond confinement, Louis added an element of humiliation. Prisoners were kept in cages in public places where the population could see and mock them. Some prisoners were forced to wear only undergarments or were completely naked. Cardinal Jean Balue, who conspired against Louis, was kept in an iron cage for 11 years, from the year 1469 until the year 1480. According to Commons, Balue was periodically stripped and exhibited as part of his punishment. Louis also used forced marriages as punishment. When he captured enemy nobles, he sometimes forced their daughters or widows to marry men of a low social status, peasants or merchants, destroying family honor through degrading marriage. In one case, Louis forced the daughter of a rebel duke to marry the royal executioner, a profession considered completely unworthy for nobility. The woman was forced to consummate the marriage under supervision to ensure the union was valid, adding a layer of humiliation and violation. This practice served a dual purpose. It punished the family through dishonor and also produced loyalty from the lower-class husband who received an unexpected social elevation. Herod the Great ruled Judea as a client king of Rome from the year 37 until the year 4 BC, known for grandiose construction projects, including the expansion of the Second Temple. Herod was also a brutal paranoid. Flavius Josephus, a Jewish Roman historian, extensively documented Herod's cruelties. When Herod suspected his wife Mariamne of infidelity, he ordered an elaborate investigation. Her servants were tortured, and according to Josephus, the interrogation included humiliations of an intimate nature to extract confessions. When Mariamne was declared guilty based on testimony obtained under torture, Herod ordered her execution in the year 29 BC, but before that she was publicly humiliated. Josephus relates that Herod forced Mariamne to present herself before the court, where explicit accusations about her alleged intimate conduct were read with degrading details. Herod also punished political enemies in ways that attacked families. When he executed nobles for treason, he frequently forced wives and daughters to be handed over to soldiers before being killed as well. Josephus mentions a case where Herod ordered that a conspirator's entire family be publicly violated in the Jerusalem theater as a punishment spectacle before executions. This combination of public violence and the intimate nature of humiliation was calculated for maximum terror. Herod wanted the population to see that defying the king resulted not only in death, but in total destruction of family honor and dignity. Vlad III ruled Wallachia in 3 periods during the 15th century, most famous for his reign from the year 1456 until the year 1462. Though known primarily for impalement, a practice where victims were pierced with stakes that passed through the body. Vlad also used impalement specifically as punishment. Of an intimate nature, Saxon chronicles from Transylvania and Germinal, pamphlets printed shortly after Vlad's death, described that he frequently ordered women accused of intimate crimes such as adultery or prostitution to be impaled, specifically through their intimate areas. The stake was inserted in a particular way to maximize humiliation beyond pain. In an account from a German manuscript of the year 1488, Vlad allegedly ordered that a rival nobleman's mistress be impaled and displayed naked at the castle entrance as a warning. The combination of forced nudity, violation by the stake, and public exhibition created a spectacle of terror that went beyond simple execution. Vlad also punished treason elaborately. When Ottoman ambassadors refused to remove their turbans in his presence, he ordered the turbans to be nailed to their heads with nails. But for traitors from his own court, punishments were more elaborate. A boyar accused of adultery with another nobleman's wife was castrated, and his organs were forced into his mouth before being impaled. 1351, he's personally remembered by historians as a brilliant but erratic ruler whose cruelty was as demonstrating a coldness that terrorized his subjects. Ibn Battuta, a Moroccan traveler who served at Tughlaq's court for years, wrote extensively about the Sultan's practices. Battuta documented that Tughlaq invented elaborate punishments for rebels and those who displeased him. A favorite punishment was forcing the condemned to wear donkey skin and then be paraded through the city of Delhi while the population was encouraged to mock and spit. For crimes considered more serious, Tughlaq added elements of an intimate nature. Ibn Battuta reported the case of a provincial governor who rebelled, was captured, and brought to Delhi. Tughlaq ordered that the governor be publicly stripped, his clothes burned, and then he was mounted backward on a donkey, a humiliating position while being paraded. After the parade, the governor was publicly castrated before final execution. In another case, Battuta personally witnessed Tughlaq suspecting that one of his courtiers was having an affair with a woman from the royal harem. The courtier was forced to undress and was publicly whipped on his intimate parts before being executed. The woman was stoned to death, but first was forced to witness her lover's execution. Tughlaq justified these punishments as necessary to maintain order and morality, but modern historians see them as manifestations of paranoia and cruelty from an increasingly unstable ruler. Henry VIII ruled England from the year 1509 until the year 1547. Though famous for his 6 marriages and break with Rome, Henry also used marriage as a tool of punishment and control. When he desired a woman at court who was married, he sometimes forced the annulment of her marriage, and then took her as mistress or wife. Anne Boleyn, his second wife, was executed under fabricated charges of adultery in May of the year 1536. But before her execution, she was subjected to a public trial where extremely explicit details of her alleged intimate relations were read in open court. This was deliberately humiliating, forcing the Queen to hear degrading accusations before the entire court. Catherine Howard, his 5th wife, suffered a similar fate in the year 1542. Her trial included detailed testimonies about her intimate behavior before and during marriage too. Henry chroniclers at the time noted that the explicit nature of the accusations was unusual and seemed designed for maximums. Humiliation. Henry also controlled his subjects' marriages. When Lord Thomas Seymour secretly married Catherine Parr, Henry's widow, without royal permission, Henry was furious. Though he did not punish Catherine directly, he created an environment of fear where everyone knew that marriages without royal approval could result in terrible consequences. Daughters of nobles who displeased Henry were sometimes forced into marriages with men. Henry specifically chose to humiliate the family, men who were old, poor, or of questionable reputation. Al-Mustansir Billah was an Abbasid caliph who ruled nominally from the year 1201 until the year 1242 AD, though real power was in the hands of Seljuk sultans. However, Al-Mustansir maintained religious and judicial authority in Baghdad. Arab chroniclers of the time documented that he applied Islamic law particularly severely for intimate crimes. Adultery was punishable by stoning according to Sharia, but Al-Mustansir added layers of humiliation. The condemned were first forced to confess publicly in the main mosque, describing their acts in explicit details. Then they were stripped and paraded through Baghdad streets to the execution site. This parade could last hours. Maximizing public shame, Ibn al-Athir, a contemporary historian, mentioned that Al-Mustansir ordered that a man accused of sodomy be not only executed, but first publicly castrated, then burned alive. The execution was conducted in the central square, with the entire population summoned to watch. Al-Mustansir saw these elaborate public punishments as a way to demonstrate religious authority and deter sin. But the effect was to terrorize the population through spectacles of violence that attacked not only bodies, but the victim's dignity. Peter I of Castile, called the cruel by his enemies and the dispenser of justice by his supporters, ruled from the year 1350 until the year 1369. Medieval Spanish chronicles described Peter as a vengeful ruler who punished his enemies in elaborate ways. When his half-brother Fadrique, master of Santiago, was accused of conspiracy, Peter ordered his execution in the year 1358. But before that, according to chronicler Pero López de Ayala, Peter humiliated Fadrique by making him parade chained and partially stripped through the streets of Seville. Peter also punished the women of his political enemies. When he captured castles of rebel nobles, he frequently forced the rebels' wives and daughters to become servants at his court, or distributed them to his own followers as forced wives. This practice of forced marriages as spoils of war served to humiliate enemy families through the degradation of their women. In a case documented by Ayala, Peter forced the widow of an executed nobleman to marry the executioner who had killed her husband, a particularly cruel punishment that combined grief with humiliation. The woman was forced under threat of her children's death. Justinian therein ruled the Byzantine Empire from the year 527 until the year 565 AD, frequently assisted by his wife Theodora. While Justinian is remembered for the codification of Roman laws and military reconquests, Procopius, a court historian, wrote The Secret History, a text not published during Justinian's lifetime that claimed to describe the dark side of the imperial couple. According to Procopius, Theodora, who had been an actress before becoming empress, was particularly cruel to women she considered rivals or threats. Procopius alleged that Theodora maintained a private prison where women accused of moral crimes were held and tortured. These allegations included that prisoners were subjected to humiliations of an intimate nature. Modern historians debate Procopius's reliability, as The Secret History was written by a political enemy. However, official records confirm that Justinian and Theodora were severe in applying laws about morality. Justinian enacted laws in the year 533 that prescribed castration as punishment for sodomy. This law was publicly applied several times in Constantinople, with executions being public spectacles intended to demonstrate imperial power and moral deterrence. Theodora also established a convent called Metanoia for reformed prostitutes, but according to some sources, women were forced to go there against their will. Effectively, a prison disguised as a religious institution. The 10 rulers examined represent different cultures, religions, and historical periods, but share a disturbing pattern. All used humiliation and violation of an intimate nature as deliberate tools of political control. These punishments were not acts of random cruelty, but calculated policies intended to terrorize populations through attacks not only on bodies, but on the victim's dignity and honor. Public humiliation, particularly of an intimate nature, was seen as more effective than swift execution because it completely destroyed the victim socially and psychologically before physical death. Victims' families carried the shame for generations. The use of forced nudity, public castration, degrading marriages, and other forms of violation demonstrated that rulers had absolute power over their subjects' bodies and lives. It is important to contextualize these practices within their eras. In many pre-modern societies, public corporal punishments were the accepted norm, and modern concepts of privacy and human dignity did not exist in the same way. Nevertheless, even by the standards of their own times, these rulers were considered exceptionally cruel. Contemporary chroniclers frequently recorded shock and horror at these punishments. The fact that multiple civilizations independently developed similar forms of punishment of an intimate nature suggests something about human nature and power. When individuals gain absolute authority without accountability, there's a tendency to exploit victims' deepest and most private vulnerabilities. The human body and sexuality become battlegrounds where domination is demonstrated most viscerally. The victims of these rulers were real people whose suffering was immense. Thousands were mutilated, humiliated, and killed in ways that attacked their most fundamental humanity. Their stories deserve to be remembered not for sensationalism, but as a warning about the dangers of unlimited power. Modern societies with the rule of law, separation of powers, and human rights protections developed partly in response to centuries of abuses like these. The study of these extreme cases of tyranny reminds us why limitations on governmental power and the protection of human dignity are essential. No individual should have the authority to inflict such suffering on others. The transition from societies where kings could order castration and public humiliation of enemies to modern democracies with civil rights was long and difficult, built on countless lives destroyed by tyrants throughout history. The legacy of these rulers serves as a permanent reminder of what humanity must never allow to happen again.